Terry Ehret is one of the founders of 16 Rivers Press. She has published 4 collections of poetry, most recently Night Sky Journey from Kelly's Cove Press. Her literary awards include the National Poetry Series, the California Book Award, the Pablo Neruda Poetry Prize, a nomination for the Northern California Book Reviewers Award, and 5 Pushcart nominations. From 2004 to 2006, she served as the Poet Laureate of Sonoma County, where she lives and teaches writing. Most recently, Terry has been a co-translator with Nancy Morales and John Johnson of volumes 1 and 2 of Plagios, Plagiarisms, the poetry of Mexican poet Ulalume Gonzalez de Leon. Terry's co-feature will be Nancy J. Morales, who is a first-generation American of Puerto Rican parents. Nancy earned her bachelor's degree from Rutgers College, a master's in teaching English as a second language from Adelphi University, and a doctorate in education from Teachers College at Columbia University. She has taught at Dominican University, the College of Marin, Sonoma State, and other schools from elementary to graduate levels. Currently, Nancy is a board member for the Northern California chapter of the Fulbright Alumni Association, and she teaches Spanish to private clients. She's co-translator with Terry and John Johnson of volumes 1 and 2 of Plagios, Plagiarisms, the poetry of Mexican poet Ulalume Gonzalez de Leon. Please welcome Terry Ehret and Nancy Morales.
Thank you, Sandy, for that introduction. And I'm so pleased that we get to be part of celebrating 9 years with Rivertown Poets. And thank you so much for all the support you've given to local poets and poets far and wide. They have a home here, and we're grateful for that. Many of you already know that Nancy and John and I began this project about a decade ago, translating what is essentially the collected published poems of Ulalume Gonzalez de Leon. And we decided to bring these poems out in 3 volumes. So volume 1 came out in 2020, right in time for COVID. The second volume this year, 2022, and we're at work on translating volume 3, which will come out in 2024. What do you need to know about Ulalume? Really, not much. You'll find out about her through her poems. But she was born in Uruguay, Montevideo. Parents were both poets and artists, and she got to know writers like Pablo Neruda as guests in her parents' home. She went to school, college at the Sorbonne in Paris. She was introduced to a lot of the philosophy of language, and particularly the philosophy of Gaston Gachelard while she studied there. She went to the University of Mexico. She met her husband, Teodoro Gonzalez de Leon, an architect, married him, became a Mexican national at that time. She considered herself a Mexican poet. And she passed away in 2009, complications of Alzheimer's. I'm going to read some poems in English. Nancy will follow me in Spanish. And I've picked some poems that represent the 3 different sections of volume 2 of Plagios. The first section is called Muertos, or the dead. The second section is called Plagios, or plagiarisms, where we really see her using all other texts and weaving the language into her own compositions in her acts of plagiarism. And the third section is called Los Juntos, which we translate as couples, but Los Juntos is probably a much more maverick term than our English translation suggests. First poem, well, before I read the poem, I wanted to read just a section of William O'Daly's blurb on the back of our book. And the reason I want to do this is in part to honor William O'Daly, a fabulous translator, that he was my introduction to Pablo Neruda through Copper Canyon Press's publications. But he has something to say about Ulalume's work, which I think clarifies the poems that we will be reading. He says, in her geometrically precise, Escheresque poems, Ulalume Gonzalez de Leon reconfigures habits of thought and perception with tenderness and empathy, navigating synchronous intimacies between the living and the dead, between the shadows that create us and the clarities that consume us. Line by line, the poems converge on untold journeys that migrate from soul to soul, even as they pollinate the imagination and escape the physics of love and time. The first poem I'm going to read is called Plan of a Different Death. When we were translating this, we struggled to get the particular form of the subjunctive just right. Spanish, like most Romance languages, has some very elaborate uses of the subjunctive, which we simply don't have in English. So it's difficult to get an English translation that matched the tentativeness of this particular subjunctive. Plan of a different death. That death pass over me between life and death as I pass through life. That my dust be seized by light as my flesh is seized by shadow. On the other side of this song, interrupted by short circuits of absence, that a silence await me, broken by sparks of thought, by lightning bolts of love.
I'm going to read the Spanish, the original poem. And if you have this book, it's on page 12. Proyecto de muerta diferente, que me pasara la vida, la muerte, entre la vida y la muerte, como me paso la vida. Que mi polvo tuviera accesos de luz, como tiene mi carne accesos de penumbra. Que en el reverso de este canto, interrumpido por cortocircuitos de ausencia, me esperara un silencio roto por chispas de pensamiento, por relámpagos de amor.
Thanks, Nancy. Thank you for reminding people what page it's on, and in case they have the book, which I found it kind of appears and disappears if I try to hold it. There it is.
There it is. There now.
It is. And what you see behind me on the screen, the virtual background, is this artwork on the front, which was painted by an abstract expressionist painter from Slovakia. Her name is Andrea Ehret, and yes, she is a relative. She is my niece. The second poem I'm going to read is called Two Thoughts of Pascal. And in the book, if you'd like to follow along, it starts on page 72 and 73. It illustrates the way that Ulalume would often take text, in this case, a philosophical text by Blaise Pascal, a French mathematician and philosopher and religious thinker. And the poem is in two parts. They are named for the parts of Pascal's treatise on human misery and on human grandeur. 1, human misery. Nothing before the infinite, and everything before nothing. Distant extremes, unreachable, the end of things, the beginning. Two poles of what is secret. From nothing I spring, to the infinite I arrive. The journey, and halfway through the journey, an illusion. And being enough not to see the nothing or the beginning, and being enough never to see the infinite. And Nancy, would you read that part in the Spanish?
Sure. Miseria del hombre, nada ante lo infinito y todo ante la nada. Alejados extremos, inabarcables, fin de las cosas, principio, dos polos del secreto. Nada de lo que broto, infinito al que llego. Trayecto, la mitad del trayecto. Apariencia y ser lo suficiente para no ver la nada ni el principio y ser lo suficiente para no ver jamás el infinito.
Section 2, human grandeur. Through space, the universe takes me in and swallows me. Through thought, I take it in. Blaise Pascal. I live in the universe, a point that is lost in it. But I think, and the universe lives in me. The universe does not think of me. Outside of me, it is lost. I live in that which is outside of me, the universe, in which I am lost, a point that thinks itself lost. The outside of me, inside of me, and the inside out.
Grandeza del hombre. Por el espacio, el universo me incluye y me traga. Por el pensamiento, yo lo incluyo. Habito el universo. Punto que en él se pierde, pero pienso y me habita. El universo no me piensa, el universo fuera de mí se pierde. Habito ese fuera de mí, del universo en que me pierdo. Punto que se piensa perdido, el fuera de mí, dentro de mí y el dentro fuera.
The next poem is on page 86 and 87. It's called Instructions for Couples. And we really struggled to know how to interpret and translate the phrase los juntos, which is this section of Plagios, volume 2. It has many ways to be translated. Those who are close together, those who are joined, those bonded to each other, those together, or just together. It can also mean couples, and we chose that in order to reflect the intimacy of the relationships she's describing in this section of the book. But she was very deliberately not using the word couples. And los juntos was, I think, her way of saying we need a new term to talk about our intimacies, something that is outside of the traditions and the patriarchy. We need to be free to define ourselves and our connections to each other in entirely new ways. So that's what she's communicating, I think, in this Instructions for Couples. It's in 5 parts, so I'll read the English followed by Nancy in the Spanish. Grasp, then let go of love. Breathe it in like borrowed air that inhaled, exhaled, always in transit, opens only in memory, simulations of rest.
Así luego soltar al amor. Respíralo como un prestado aire que aspirado e inspirado. Siempre en tránsito, abre en la memoria sola simulacros de pausa.
To have it, don't have it. Its presence is safe in its twin absence. It wants to be more, piercing promise of return.
Tenerlo, no tenerlo. Su presencia está a salvo. En su ausencia, gemela. Quiere ser más aguda. Promesa de retorno.
Walk alone in love's space, where they say far and near with the same ancient word, where the narrow being together invites you to be limitless.
Andar solo en su espacio, donde lejos y cerca se dicen con la misma palabra antigua, donde el angosto estar juntos invita a ilimitarse.
Live not time only, time in love, never and always in the now. Days at the same time lost, recovered. Continuity in suspense, eternity to scale, made of intermittencies.
Vivir no el tiempo solo, enamorada tiempo, nunca y siempre en ahora. Días al mismo tiempo, perdidos, recobrados, continuidad en vilo, eternidad a escala, hecha de intermitencias.
A certainty already takes hold in constant danger, in long amazement. Open, close your hands that grace may flow.
Una seguridad ya cunde en sostenido peligro, en largo asombro. Abrir, cerrar las manos, que la gracias circule.
And I'm going to hand the program over to Nancy. The screen is yours.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Welcome and thank you all for your support. Thank you for having us. And it's a real gift to be here. And we're so grateful. I am very grateful. Today, I kind of want to begin a little bit of in kind of talk about how I'm here in this from the vantage point of talking about translation and kind of deconstructing my process. I think that the idea, and I say of translation, of poetry, and as you see a poem, you hear a poem, and sometimes, for many times, it's very beautiful, it's very moving, and it kind of creates something inside of you. And for the translator, in this case, myself and Terry, and I'll speak of my personal process with it, I hear something, I read something in Spanish, I read it in Spanish, and it has images for me, and it evokes feelings and emotions. And sometimes I'm listening to how it would go in English. I'm like, no, that's not the word in English. That's not the way they're saying it in Spanish. That's not how I would hear it in Spanish. I immediately get this. What can we get as close to as possible to that? And so, and for me, I was carrying recently this idea of death and love, and holding these two things, and this man, George, who passed, who felt very alive to me, and I felt very close to him, even though I wasn't as close as, say, his family members. All right. So my first poem is called Either Way You Disappear. It's on page 65 if you're following long in our book, an excerpt from Plato's Statesman. The old ones climbed out of the earth to live their lives in reverse. Their white hair turned black. Their bodies grew small until they became children, and they disappeared. De todos modos, se desaparece. Recortado en política, Platón. Salían entonces los viejos de la tierra para vivir sus vidas al revés. Sus cabellos blancos se volvían negros, sus cuerpos decrecían hasta tornarse niños y desaparecían. And I chose it because when we did a memorial, and it was just this past weekend, and it was at this guest house, and everyone, the wife had spoke of a marriage of 60 years and this life well lived. And yet, and everyone spoke, and they had him on video on a loop, and he was telling jokes, the husband, so he was there. And it was a celebration of life, and everyone was telling stories, and that would continue to be this theme of, I remember him and he loved this house right here, and I remember him doing this. So it was very alive, yet it wasn't. And everyone was looking at him, pictures of him as a young person. They would look backwards, then we look forward. So I thought that just really was fascinating to me. So the next poem is in her Muertos poems, page 3, and it's called Dead One. You're no longer here, and being here is the only eloquent way to be. Accustomed to surprise, faithful to change. In which form? Why did you stop? And so, being, you are not. Muerto uno, ya no estás, y estar es la única manera elocuente de ser. Costumbre de sorpresas, fidelidad al cambio. ¿En cuál forma? ¿Por qué te detuviste? Y así siendo no eres. And the other poem I chose again in the Muertos is on page 11, Almost Dead too. He felt so old, he set his memory on fire. Collector who cannot use the priceless objects he collects. Casi muerto dos, tan viejo se sintió que a su memoria prendió fuego. Coleccionista que no puede usar los objetos sin par que colecciona. And this person also, George, he loved fire. So I just thought these things came to me. And that's why I'm sharing them, these particular poems. All right, Los Juntos, couples. And as Terry said, Los Juntos is those that are together. Los Juntos are you're together, your group, you're in, and we chose, as Terry said, couples because we wanted to express something that people could identify with very quickly as a couple in being together rather than just saying together. But of course, there's many ways of being together. Okay, so my first one is on page 113. Y se llama Simultaneous Poem. Now, hands, words, speak only of an affair of skin and thought. I can't translate it into just one of those two tongues. Poema simultáneo. Ahora las manos, las palabras, dicen uno solo asunto de piel y pensamiento. No puedo traducirlo a una sola de esas dos lenguas. And la otra es diurnal. and it's on page 91. Daytime is what occurs around our bodies, surviving in the night like a private bubble of light in which love always keeps its eyes open. So we only dream that we are dreaming, mindful of our agreement to be diurnal, with eyelids dancing on the tip of a geyser. Diurno. El día es lo que sucede alrededor de nuestros cuerpos. Sobrevive la noche como una burbuja privada de la luz, en la que siempre tiene el amor los ojos abiertos, para que solo soñemos que soñamos, atentos a nuestro pacto de ser diurnos, con párpados que bailan en la punta de envejecer. And the other poems I thought was very fascinating is she had this Time Life magazine, and we actually could see this, whereby she looked at photos in Time Life, and they were very much about photos of insects and animal and things like that, and they were science type things. And so I believe Ulalume had I know she spoke of this. She had a very strong reflection and reaction to it. It was very provoking to her. And she thought it'd be very interesting, and why not create a poem about this experience, about looking at it. So here's the picture, and she's looking at it, and she wanted to create a poem in words of the picture. So I thought that was really great. I think before I say it, did you want to say something about that, Terry, about the Time Life series or anything?
Yeah, it's a multi-volume series published by Time Life on different scientific subjects, but the one that seemed to really capture her interest was the insects book. And she uses this language of science to talk about our experiences. And as you'll see in this poem story, that it's also about memory.
Thank you, Terry. Story. Many years ago, 35 million, these fragile bodies, their flight congealed in small coffins of amber during the Upper Eocene in Northern Europe. Forests grew, and there was one tree, grandfather pine. The resin welled up through cracks and wounds in its bark, and in it, insects became trapped. The resin, dried and buried, was later dragged toward the Baltic Sea. Today, you can gather pieces of amber on its beaches. Cuento. De hace años, muchos años, 35 millones, estos frágiles cuerpos, su vuelo coagulado, sus pequeños sarcófagos de ámbar, durante el Eoceno superior en Europa septentrional crecían bosques y un árbol era un abuelo del pino. La resina brotaba en su corteza de las grietas y heridas, y en ella los insectos quedaron atrapados. La resina se secó y enterrada fue arrastrada después hacia el mar Báltico. Hoy se pueden recoger trozos de ámbar en sus playas. The other reason is my son loves Jurassic World, and I think it's coming out this Friday. So I thought with the amber, it was a little bit of recognition of Jurassic World. So I just thought that this one captured it well. And my last one is on page 39, Oracle. It's a quick response to the preceding poem so that it doesn't occur to you to compare your short life with that of a mayfly. In the butterfly book, Dr. W.J. Holland writes more or less, when there is no moon in the sky, when the midday sun is a dark cherry red, when the seas are frozen and still, when the polar ice caps have advanced to the equator, when nothing remains of dead cities but dust, then there will be on the bare rocks near the eternal snows of Panama a tiny insect perched upon a bit of lichen. It will move its antennae in the dim light, alone, alive. Okay. Oráculo. Rápida respuesta al poema anterior para que no se te ocurra comparar tu vida breve con la de una efímera. En el libro de las mariposas, el doctor W.J. Holland escribe más o menos: cuando no haya en el cielo luna, cuando el sol de mediodía sea de un oscuro rojo cereza, cuando los mares estén helados y inmóviles, cuando los casquetes polares hayan avanzado hasta el ecuador, cuando no quede sino polvo de las ciudades muertas, habrá entonces en las rocas desnudas, próximas a las nieves eternas de Panamá, un diminuto insecto sobre un tronco de liquen detenido. Moverá las antenas en la luz débil, solo vivo.
Thank you, Nancy. That was great.
You're welcome.
Love hearing the poems in your voice with the music of that language.
Thank you.